For over 2 centuries, Japan stood as one of the most secretive nations on Earth. While the world around it changed, Japan remained hidden, fiercely guarding its culture, its people, and its way of life. But in a stunning transformation, it emerged from isolation to become one of the most powerful and influential countries on the planet. What happened in those 200 years? How did a nation that once turned its back on the world rise to shape the future of technology, culture, and global politics? This is the untold story of Japan, a journey through centuries of conflict, resilience, and reinvention. Ancient Japan and the birth of the imperial system. The story of Japan begins long before the famous samurai and shogunates. It starts with the island's first inhabitants, who arrived around 40,000 years ago, migrating from the Asian mainland. These early settlers brought with them essential knowledge, such as agriculture and metallurgy foundations, upon which Japan would build its future. Archaeological evidence suggests that these early inhabitants, belonging to the Jomon culture, lived in semi-permanent settlements and created unique pottery that is considered among the oldest in the world. These early societies began to develop their own customs, including fishing, hunting, and cultivating crops, which laid the groundwork for the establishment of permanent settlements and eventually the earliest kingdoms. By the 3rd century AD, Japan began to form into a more structured society. A centralized power emerged from the southern islands, and the Yamato region, located in what is now modern-day Nara Prefecture, became the heart of this growing nation. This area would be home to Japan's first royal family, the Imperial House of Japan, which established its rule and laid the groundwork for what would become the longest continuing hereditary monarchy in the world. The unification of Japan under the emperor's rule was a monumental moment in its history. By the 6th century, Japan began to be increasingly influenced by mainland Asian cultures, particularly from China and Korea. Buddhism was introduced from Korea in the year 552, marking a significant shift in the spiritual and cultural landscape of Japan. With Buddhism came new forms of art, architecture, and even political structure. The introduction of writing, a gift from China, allowed for the recording of Japan's earliest chronicles in history, laying the foundation for Japan's rich cultural and intellectual heritage. It wasn't just religion and culture that Japan borrowed from its neighbors, it was also politics. In 645, Japan introduced its first major political reform, the Taika reforms, which aimed to restructure the country's system to mirror the centralized imperial system of China. These reforms granted more power to the emperor and established a court system that would form the backbone of future dynasties. For nearly 4 centuries, Japan's imperial court moved from city to city, each time following the reign of a new emperor. But by the end of the 8th century, Japan would settle on a permanent capital in Kyoto, chosen by Emperor Kamu in 794. With this decision, Japan entered the Heian period, which would become known as a golden age of court culture, poetry, and art. Kyoto became the center of Japanese civilization, and the imperial court reached new heights of artistic achievement. However, despite the grandeur of the Heian court, it was not long before its influence began to unravel. As the emperor's power became increasingly disconnected from the realities of governing, regional warlords and samurai began to gain more control. The seeds of a new era were sown, one that would see the rise of the legendary samurai, the rise of the samurai and the shogunate. As the 12th century began, Japan's political landscape was on the verge of dramatic change. The once powerful imperial court in Kyoto became increasingly detached from the realities of governing a growing and fractured nation. Local warlords, known as daimyo, began to consolidate power in the provinces, and samurai, highly skilled warriors who served these lords, emerged as key figures in this new era of military rule. This shift in power was gradual but inevitable. By the middle of the 12th century, tensions between the imperial court and the growing power of the regional clans had reached a boiling point. The conflict erupted in the Genpei War, 1180-1185, a brutal civil war between the Taira and Minamoto clans. At the heart of the war was the struggle for control over the imperial throne, with each clan vying to install their own candidate as emperor. The Minamoto clan, led by the brilliant and ruthless Minamoto no Yoritomo, emerged victorious. In 1192, Yoritomo was granted the title of shogun by the emperor, effectively making him the ruler of Japan. This marked the beginning of the Kamakura shogunate, a military government that would rule Japan for over 700 years. The emperor remained the symbolic ruler, but real power now lay in the hands of the shogun, a dramatic shift from the previous centuries of imperial rule. Under the shogunate system, Japan's political structure became decentralized. The country was divided into regions controlled by powerful samurai who answered to the shogun rather than the emperor. This new system allowed Japan to maintain stability and prevent internal strife, but it also led to frequent power struggles as different clans vied for control. The samurai, who were known for their martial prowess, strict codes of honor, and unflinching loyalty, would become one of Japan's most enduring symbols. The Bushido Code, which emphasized honor, duty, and discipline, would shape the samurai ethos for centuries, influencing not just military actions, but also Japanese society at large. The first years of the Kamakura shogunate were far from peaceful. In the late 13th century, Japan faced a new and unprecedented threat, an invasion by the Mongols. In 1274 and again in 1281, Kublai Khan, the ruler of the Mongol Empire, launched two massive invasions of Japan. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Japan's samurai, under the leadership of the shogunate, managed to repel the Mongol forces with the help of a miraculous typhoon known as the kamikaze or divine wind. The Mongols were defeated, and Japan's independence was preserved, but the cost of defending the nation was steep. By the early 14th century, Japan was already grappling with internal strife. Economic troubles, a weakening central authority, and dissatisfaction with the shogunate's rule led to a crisis. In 1333, Emperor Go-Daigo, seeking to restore imperial power, launched a coup against the shogunate. Although his efforts were successful at first, just 5 years later in 1338, another military government, the Ashikaga shogunate, rose to replace it. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in Japan's history, one that would be dominated by constant feudal conflict and the rise of powerful samurai factions, the Warring States period, and the rise of unification. By the 15th century, Japan was on the brink of total collapse. The Ashikaga shogunate, weakened by internal divisions and the rise of powerful regional samurai, struggled to maintain control over the country. By the 1460s, Japan descended into a period of intense civil war, known as the Warring States period, Sengoku Jidai. The country was divided into a patchwork of independent states, each ruled by local lords or daimyo, who were constantly at war with one another in their pursuit of power and land. This was a time of immense upheaval and military innovation. It was during this period that some of Japan's most famous samurai generals, such as Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, would rise to prominence. Each of these men played a crucial role in shaping the future of Japan. Oda Nobunaga was the first to make significant strides toward unifying Japan. By the 1570s, he had conquered much of central Japan and effectively shattered the power of rival clans. Nobunaga was known for his ruthless tactics and his ability to bring together disparate factions under his rule. He embraced the use of firearms, which had been introduced to Japan by the Portuguese in the 16th century, and used them to devastating effect in battles such as the Battle of Nagashino in 1575. However, Nobunaga's efforts were cut short. In 1582, he was betrayed by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, who staged a coup and forced Nobunaga to commit seppuku. His death sent shockwaves through Japan, but it also created an opportunity for his loyal general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, to rise to power. Hideyoshi, a commoner who had risen through the ranks of the military, proved to be both a master strategist and a political genius. By the late 1580s, he had succeeded in uniting most of Japan, effectively ending the Sengoku period. Hideyoshi's rule was marked by a series of significant reforms, including land surveys to ensure efficient tax collection and the confiscation of weapons from peasants. Yet, despite his power, Hideyoshi's ambitions fell short, particularly in his failed invasions of Korea, which weakened his influence both domestically and abroad. Upon Hideyoshi's death in 1598, his young son, Toyotomi Hideyori, was left to inherit the mantle of power. However, the country was still divided, and Hideyori's reign was marked by conflict with rival factions, particularly the Tokugawa clan, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. In 1600, Ieyasu's forces decisively defeated the Toyotomi loyalists in the Battle of Sekigahara, ending the civil war, and cementing Ieyasu's position as the supreme ruler of Japan. In 1603, Ieyasu was granted the title of shogun, ushering in the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan for more than 2.5 centuries. The Tokugawa shogunate and Japan's isolation. The Tokugawa shogunate under Tokugawa Ieyasu brought about an era of relative peace and stability that would last over 250 years. This period, known as the Edo period, saw Japan transform from a fractured land of warring states into a unified society, characterized by strict social hierarchies, economic prosperity, and cultural flourishing. The once divided country was now under the Tokugawa family's rule, ushering in a period unmatched in Japanese history for political stability. One of Tokugawa Ieyasu's most significant decisions was to relocate the capital to Edo, modern-day Tokyo. This strategic move not only helped consolidate his power, but also laid the foundation for Edo to become one of the world's largest cities. Over time, it became the political, economic, and cultural heart of Japan. Ieyasu's shogunate, however, did not merely focus on internal stability. It was equally determined to protect Japan from foreign threats. One of the most consequential decisions made by the Tokugawa government was the implementation of the Sakoku policy in 1635. This policy effectively closed Japan off from the rest of the world for over 200 years. Foreigners were banned from entering Japan, and Japanese citizens were forbidden from traveling abroad. The primary aim of Sakoku was to prevent the spread of Christianity, which the Tokugawa shogunate feared could destabilize its rule, as well as to prevent foreign influence that might challenge Japan's peaceful existence. Trade was still permitted, but it was strictly controlled. Japan engaged in limited trade with China, Korea, and the Dutch. The Dutch were allowed to establish a trading post on the island of Dejima in Nagasaki, effectively the only window through which Japan could interact with the outside world. While Japan's isolation protected it from external influence, it also meant that the country was cut off from the scientific and technological advancements occurring in Europe and the rest of the world during the Age of Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution. Despite this isolation, Japan saw a flourishing of its own unique culture during the Edo period. The economy boomed, and the population grew rapidly. Cities like Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka became thriving centers of trade, culture, and arts. The rise of a wealthy merchant class, known as the Chonin, led to an explosion in cultural output, particularly in the realms of ukiyo-e woodblock prints, kabuki theater, and haiku poetry. The arts became deeply ingrained in the social fabric of Japan, with many of the period's cultural achievements influencing the nation's identity even into the modern era. However, Japan's rigid social structure remained unchanged during the Tokugawa period. Society was divided into four main classes: the samurai at the top, followed by farmers, artisans, and merchants. While the samurai enjoyed privileges, the merchant class, despite their wealth, remained at the bottom of the social hierarchy. This hierarchy helped maintain order, but also limited social mobility and innovation. As the 18th century came to a close, Japan began to face mounting internal problems. The rapid population growth put pressure on agricultural production, and the Tokugawa government struggled to cope with famine and economic stagnation. The once prosperous economy began to slow, and cracks began to appear in the Tokugawa system. The isolationist policies, while protecting Japan from foreign influence, also hindered technological progress. The rest of the world was changing, and Japan's isolation left it lagging behind. The end of isolation and the Meiji Restoration. By the mid-19th century, Japan's isolation was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. While the world around Japan was rapidly evolving with industrialization and imperialism spreading across Europe and the United States, Japan remained steadfastly isolated, adhering to a policy of sakoku, closing its borders to foreign trade and influence. This policy, which had lasted for over 2 centuries, was initially implemented to preserve Japan's unique culture and political structure. But as the world progressed, Japan found itself falling behind, unable to compete with the technological advancements and global developments occurring beyond its shores. The catalyst for this dramatic shift came in 1853, when American Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Tokyo Bay with a fleet of 4 black ships, brimming with firepower and modern technology. Perry's mission was clear: to force Japan to open its ports to American trade. The sudden appearance of the U.S. fleet was a shock to Japan's leadership, who realized they could not defend themselves against such advanced military technology. The sight of the American warships towering over Japan's traditional wooden vessels was a wake-up call. Despite their desire to preserve their isolation, Japan was now confronted with the reality that its closed-door policy had made it vulnerable to foreign coercion. Unable to match the superior firepower of the U.S. fleet, the Tokugawa shogunate had little choice but to negotiate. In 1854, Japan signed the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opened 2 of its ports, Shimoda and Hakodate, to American ships, allowing them to resupply and trade. This treaty marked the beginning of the end for Japan's isolationist policies and initiated a series of unequal treaties with Western powers. The treaty, while ending Japan's self-imposed isolation, humiliated the Tokugawa regime and set the stage for a growing disillusionment with the shogunate's ability to protect the nation from foreign influence. The signing of the Treaty of Kanagawa was followed by similar treaties with Britain, Russia, and the Netherlands. These foreign powers imposed terms that were heavily favorable to themselves, further undermining the authority of the Tokugawa government. The Western powers gained economic and legal privileges in Japan, while the Japanese people felt increasingly alienated and powerless in their own land. The shogunate, once the guardian of Japan's sovereignty, was now seen as weak and incapable of defending the nation's honor and interests. The encroachment of foreign powers sparked widespread unrest within Japan, particularly among the samurai, who had once been loyal to the shogunate. Many of these warriors were now disillusioned by the government's failure to protect the nation. The rise of anti-Tokugawa sentiment was particularly strong in the southern domains of Choshu and Satsuma, where young samurai and political reformers began calling for the restoration of imperial rule. These factions argued that Japan's only hope for survival and prosperity lay in returning power to the emperor, rather than continuing under the rule of the shogunate. The pressure to restore imperial rule continued to grow throughout the 1860s, as the Tokugawa shogunate struggled to maintain control. In 1867, after years of political turmoil and a weakening central authority, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the last Tokugawa shogun, formally resigned and handed power back to the emperor. This marked the end of over 2 centuries of Tokugawa rule and signified the start of the Meiji Restoration, a turning point in Japan's history. Emperor Meiji, the youthful and charismatic leader, assumed full control, and Japan was officially transformed from a feudal military state into a modern nation-state. The restoration of imperial power marked the beginning of a new era for Japan, an era of profound transformation that would see the country rapidly modernize and emerge as a global power. Under Emperor Meiji, Japan would break free from its isolation and embrace the New World Order. The Meiji government embarked on an ambitious program of modernization, with the goal of catching up with the Western powers that had forced Japan to open its doors. The government's vision was to transform Japan into a modern industrial nation that could stand on equal footing with the West. To achieve this, Japan adopted Western technologies, ideas, and institutions. The construction of railroads, factories, and schools helped lay the foundation for Japan's rapid industrialization. The feudal system was dismantled, and a new class structure emerged. The samurai, once the elite warriors of Japan, were abolished as the government introduced new land reforms, redistributing land from the aristocracy to the peasantry, giving more power to the government and helping to fuel the country's growth. Japan's military underwent a major transformation as well. The government adopted Western military tactics and technologies, creating a modern conscript army that would soon become one of the most formidable in the world. The country also adopted a modern navy equipped with steam-powered warships and advanced weaponry. These sweeping changes helped Japan quickly catch up with the industrialized nations of Europe and the United States. One of the most significant political changes during the Meiji era was the creation of a new political system. In 1889, Japan adopted the Meiji Constitution, which established a constitutional monarchy. The emperor retained significant power, but the political system became more akin to Western models, with a bicameral legislature and a cabinet system. This political shift provided Japan with the foundation it needed to pursue its ambitions on the world stage, both militarily and economically. In a matter of decades, Japan transformed from a feudal society into a modern industrialized nation. Japan's newly reformed military was put to the test during the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894-1895, where Japan defeated China and annexed Taiwan. Japan's victory in this war marked its emergence as a regional power in East Asia, setting the stage for its future ambitions. This newfound power was also demonstrated in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905, where Japan's modernized military achieved a stunning victory over Russia, making Japan the first Asian power to defeat a European power in the modern era. Japan's growing military might, coupled with its industrial strength, positioned the country as a formidable force in the early 20th century. The Meiji Restoration had transformed Japan in ways that no one could have imagined just a few decades earlier. Japan had gone from a secluded feudal society to a modern, industrialized nation capable of challenging the great powers of the world. But this newfound strength would come with its own set of challenges as Japan's leaders began to set their sights on expanding beyond its borders, eventually leading to Japan's involvement in World War II and its rise as a military empire.